Smaug's hoard was not a treasure, but a prison, holding something far more dangerous than gold, something that could reshape the fate of Middle-earth. The question hung in the air, thick with dread. The flames from the torches flickered, casting long, dancing shadows on the cold stone walls of Erebor. Gandalf stood before the great hall, his eyes scanning the darkened corners of the mountain. For years, the story had been one of a dragon hoarding treasure, gold, jewels, artifacts. But what if there was more to this tale than met the eye? What if Smaug, the great fire-breathing menace, had not simply been a greedy dragon, but a keeper of something far more dangerous? His hoard was vast, shimmering with the spoils of centuries. But beneath the gleaming piles of gold and jewels, could there have been something far darker, a relic, a power, something that had been locked away long before Smaug ever arrived? Gandalf's thoughts echoed in his mind as he surveyed the cavernous expanse of Erebor. This was the place of legend, where dwarves had dwelled for generations, carving their kingdom from the very bones of the earth. But it was also a place shrouded in mystery. The fire that had driven Smaug to take Erebor had been a catalyst, a spark that had set in motion a chain of events that had led to the kingdom's fall. But what had the dwarves uncovered here? Something they had been guarding with such fervor. Smaug had not simply hoarded riches, no. He had guarded something else, something far older, something that might have been sealed away for reasons far greater than mere gold. It was that mystery that had drawn Gandalf back to Erebor. For years, he had heard whispers of the relics, the cursed artifacts, hidden deep within the mountain, but no one had dared to seek them. Until now, Smaug's hoard is no simple collection, Gandalf murmured to himself. What the dwarves uncovered, it was never meant to be found. The group stood in the heart of Erebor, the weight of their task pressing down on them like the stone walls surrounding them. Gandalf, Aragorn, Thorin Oakenshield, and the newcomer, a descendant of Durin himself, had been drawn here by the promise of hidden knowledge. But each was driven by their own motives. Gandalf was curious, eager to uncover the truth about what had been buried beneath Erebor for so long. Aragorn, the king in exile, felt a deep sense of duty to protect Middle-earth from the darkness that still lingered in the shadows of ancient places. Thorin, heir to Erebor, was haunted by the legacy of his ancestors, the very dwarves who had awakened whatever evil lay dormant beneath the mountain. The newcomer, a dwarven historian with ties to Durin's lineage, was determined to uncover the truths of Erebor's past truths that might shed light on the mystery of Smaug's true role in the mountain's fate. He had spent years searching for answers, driven by a need to understand what his ancestors had hidden from the world. "It's here," the dwarven historian said, his voice thick with reverence. "The heart of Erebor, the place where the secrets were buried. The dwarves knew something was here. They couldn't have missed it. Whatever they found, they sealed it away for a reason. Gandalf's eyes narrowed as he listened, his mind racing with the implications. Yes, he murmured, but what was it? And why was it kept hidden? Thorin crossed his arms, his face hard with the weight of his lineage. I have my suspicions. My people dug deep into the earth, far deeper than any dwarf should. It said that they unearthed things that were never meant to see the light of day. Things tied to ancient powers. Aragorn stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. And Smaug, what was he guarding, if not just treasure? Gandalf turned to face him, his expression grave. Smaug was never just a dragon hoarding riches. He was a keeper, a guardian of something far more dangerous, something that could alter the balance of Middle-earth. As they ventured deeper into the mountain, strange signs began to manifest. The air grew colder, the walls seemed to shift, and the faintest whisper of voices echoed in the distance. It was as though the very stone of Erebor was alive, shifting and murmuring secrets long buried. The deeper they went, the more unsettling the atmosphere became. The ancient runes on the walls, once thought to be mere decoration, now seemed to pulse with an unfamiliar energy, their meanings hidden behind layers of time. The dwarven historian examined the runes with growing unease. These markings, they speak of power, of something far older than the dwarves. What they unearthed, it wasn't just treasure. Aragorn approached the wall, his hand resting gently against the cold stone. What did they find? He asked. The historian shook his head, his voice trembling with the weight of his discovery. Something tied to Morgoth, something dark. The dwarves sealed it away, but the power, it never truly went away. Gandalf's eyes flickered with recognition. Morgoth, he whispered. Of course, this place, Erebor, wasn't just a mountain of treasure. It was a key to Morgoth's lingering influence. And Smaug was the keeper, bound to guard it, not out of greed, but out of necessity. The further they traveled, the more the danger became real. Strange shadows flitted in the corner of their vision, whispers growing louder with each step. The relics the dwarves had uncovered were no simple treasures. They were ancient artifacts tied to Morgoth's very essence. Smaug had not merely hoarded gold. He had kept an ancient evil buried beneath Erebor. And now, that evil was waking. The ground beneath them trembled as a low growl vibrated through the mountain stone, followed by a series of whispers that seemed to rise from the very depths of Erebor itself. Shadows began to form into shapes, shifting, curling around the group. The mountain itself seemed to be reacting to their presence, as if it remembered the power it had once contained. This is it, Gandalf said, his voice tinged with urgency. The power we've been seeking. The reason Smaug guarded Erebor. It wasn't treasure, it was a prison. A prison for something far worse than a dragon. Aragorn's grip tightened on his sword, as the shadows in the corners of the room seemed to move, inching toward them. We're not alone," he muttered. The dwarven historian stepped back, his face pale. "What is this? What have we awakened?" Gandalf looked to the group, his eyes filled with grim determination. "We've awakened the evil that the dwarves sealed away long ago. And now we must decide. Do we confront it, or do we leave it to fester beneath Erebor, to rise again when we least expect it?" The group paused, each of them feeling the weight of the decision before them. The very fabric of Erebor seemed to be pulling them toward the truth, but the truth could be their undoing. The deepening shadows encroached, the whispers growing louder, more urgent. Gandalf's voice cut through the growing tension. "Whatever we do, we must be prepared. For what lies beneath this mountain is no mere relic. It is the key to an ancient evil, one that has been locked away for far too long." The chamber trembled once more, and the ground beneath their feet shuddered. It was as if Erebor itself was telling them no, warning them of the danger that was about to be unleashed. As the group stood on the brink of discovery, the tension in the air reached a breaking point. The reality of what lay before them was undeniable. Smaug's hoard was never just gold. It was a prison. And now, the ancient evil that had been contained for centuries was beginning to stir once more. What they uncovered in Erebor's depths would change everything. The stone halls of Erebor echoed with the weight of ages. Gandalf stepped into the darkness, his staff alight, illuminating the deep chambers of the lonely mountain. For centuries, this place had been a symbol of dwarven strength, a towering mountain filled with gold and riches beyond imagination. But it was more than that. Beneath the glittering piles of treasure lay something else, something that had been hidden away, buried under layers of stone, sealed by the very dwarves who had once called Erebor home. Smaug, the great dragon, had hoarded it all, the treasure, the jewels, the gold. But in his greed, he had also unwittingly guarded a secret, one that had the potential to shape the fate of Middle-earth. The question was no longer just about the treasure. It was about what Smaug had been keeping. What was it that the dwarves had unearthed beneath the surface of Erebor? And why had they hidden it so fiercely? What had Smaug been protecting? And more importantly, why? As Gandalf and his companions moved deeper into the mountain, the air grew thicker, laden with centuries of dust and forgotten power. The flickering torchlight seemed to cast longer shadows, as though the very walls themselves were alive, whispering secrets that had been locked away for far too long. The journey to Erebor had not been easy. The group had traveled from the farthest reaches of Middle-earth, crossing perilous lands and facing threats that ranged from wild beasts to orc hordes. But now, here, beneath the mountain's heart, the danger was not just physical. It was ancient, woven into the very stone, and the secrets they sought were deeper than the gold Smaug had hoarded. Gandalf, always a figure of wisdom, was the first to speak. There is more to this mountain than meets the eye. Erebor was founded by Durin, the first of the Dwarven kings. His lineage, his people, were obsessed with mining the deepest veins of the earth. They were after treasure, yes, but what they found was something far darker. Thorin Oakenshield, ever the heir to Erebor, looked at the ancient runes on the walls. His face, usually proud and regal, now showed traces of doubt. I've heard stories. My ancestors spoke of treasures deep within this mountain, but they never spoke of what they truly found, did they, Gandalf? Gandalf's gaze darkened. No, Thorin, they didn't, because the treasure they found was not meant to be unearthed. What they uncovered was tied to Morgoth, the first Dark Lord, the master of all shadows and evil. The dwarves' obsession with gold led them to disturb something that should have remained buried. And Smaug, with all his greed, wasn't merely hoarding riches. He was guarding something far worse. Aragorn stepped forward, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. His voice was calm, but filled with purpose. So, Smaug's treasure was never just wealth. It was a prison, and he was the warden. Gandalf nodded. Yes, Smaug was no ordinary dragon. He was guarding a key to something far more dangerous than any hoard. A relic, perhaps, or a weapon. Whatever it was tied to Morgoth's power. Thorin looked to the ground, haunted by the thought. And my ancestors knew this. They knew what they were guarding. They did, Gandalf replied gravely. But they underestimated the power of what they had uncovered. They thought they could contain it, lock it away. But now, Smaug has been slain, and that dark power stirs once more. As they descended further into the mountain, the signs of the ancient evil grew more apparent. Strange symbols, not of dwarven origin, appeared on the walls. They glowed faintly, pulsating with an energy that seemed to reach out to them. The deeper they went, the more the mountain seemed to speak to them, its stone whispers carrying the echoes of past kings of Durin's line and of those who had come before. Look at these, the dwarven historian, one of their new companions said, pointing to the runes. These aren't just decorative. These are warnings. Warnings that something was sealed away, something that the dwarves couldn't afford to uncover. Aragorn stepped closer, his face troubled. What is it? What are we really dealing with here? Gandalf's expression grew somber. The dwarves' greed led them to find a power older than any treasure, a power tied to Morgoth himself. And when they dug too deep, they uncovered something that should have been left undisturbed. They reached a door at the end of the corridor, an ancient, sealed doorway that had clearly been shut for centuries. The lock was of a kind none of them had ever seen, ancient and intricate, crafted to protect whatever lay beyond. Gandalf's fingers traced the markings on the door, and a coldness settled over the group. This is it, Gandalf said softly, the chamber where they sealed the darkness away. And now, it's time we find out what they truly uncovered. Thorin's voice faltered as he spoke. Are we ready for this? gave him a hard look. His eyes filled with a knowing sadness. The only choice we have is to face it, Thorin. The darkness they buried here is tied to a Reber's history, and we must uncover it before it's too late. With a hesitant movement, Gandalf placed his staff against the lock, and with a soft click, the ancient door creaked open. Inside, a vast chamber stretched before them, its walls lined with dark stone and forgotten relics. At the center of the room, resting on a stone pedestal, was the object they had been seeking. It was not a chest of gold, nor a pile of jewels, but an orb dark, obsidian, and pulsing with an ominous energy. A relic from the First Age, tied directly to Morgoth's power. The room seemed to grow colder as they approached, the shadows gathering like smoke, pressing in on them. The orb's surface flickered, as if something inside it was alive, waiting to be unleashed. This is what Smaug guarded, Gandalf whispered, awe and fear mixing in his voice. This is the key to Morgoth's power. And now, it's ours to confront. Thorin's face was pale. What do we do now? Gandalf's eyes never left the orb. We destroy it before it's too late. But know this, Thorin, this artifact is not just a key. It is a beacon that calls out to the darkness beneath this mountain. The tension in the air was palpable as the group drew closer to the artifact. The whispers from the walls seemed louder now, the shadows more oppressive, as if Erebor itself were alive, aware of their intrusion. The very ground seemed to pulse with the dark power contained within the orb. This was never about treasure, Gandalf said, his voice tinged with regret. It was about something much worse. And now, we must decide, do we leave it buried, or do we risk everything to destroy it? The chamber seemed to close in around them, and the shadows stretched longer, darker, as the choice hung in the balance. The deep silence of Erebor enveloped the group as they ventured further into the heart of the mountain. The walls, once familiar and welcoming, now felt like a darkened tomb, a place forgotten by time. The torches flickered in the air, casting eerie shadows that seemed to dance and writhe on their own accord. Gandalf led the way, his staff glowing faintly with magic, lighting the path through the winding corridors. His expression was grave, his senses heightened as they moved deeper into the mountain's depths. This place is older than even I imagined, Gandalf murmured, his voice low but filled with awe. The dwarves built Erebor, but they did not know the full extent of what lay beneath. They never should have dug so deep. Aragorn, his sword resting loosely at his side, looked around, his brow furrowed in concern. What did they find, Gandalf? What did they awaken? Before Gandalf could respond, the group arrived at the entrance to a sealed chamber. The door, made of thick iron and ancient wood, seemed undisturbed by time. Runes, old and worn, were etched into its surface, but they were unlike any the group had seen before. They pulsed with a dark energy, shifting subtly, almost These runes, Gandalf whispered, are not dwarven. They belong to an age long before Erebor was even a thought in Durin's mind. They are tied to a power far older, far darker. The air grew heavier, oppressive, as if the very mountain had become aware of their presence. Gandalf reached out and placed his hand on the door, speaking a few words in a language none of them recognized. With a groan of ancient metal, the door creaked open, revealing a vast chamber beyond, one that had been sealed off for millennia. Inside, the air was thick with dust and shadow. The walls were adorned with strange symbols and markings, their meanings lost to time. Yet, as the group entered the chamber, the symbols seemed to shift, their shapes twisting and contorting as if they were alive. The air crackled with an unsettling energy, and a low, almost imperceptible whisper seemed to emanate from the very stone beneath their feet. The room was vast, stretching farther than the eye could see. At its center was a pedestal, upon which lay an object shrouded in darkness, its shape hidden by the thick veil of shadow that hung around it. As they approached, the temperature in the room dropped, and the whispers grew louder, more distinct. They could hear fragmented words, ancient voices, echoing through time. "Guardians," Gandalf said quietly, his voice filled with both wonder and fear. "These are the guardians of Morgoth's power, remnants of the First Age." The group moved cautiously, but even as they stepped forward, a sense of dread filled the air. Shadows in the corners of the room seemed to writhe, coiling in upon themselves. And then, with a sharp, sudden motion, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was tall, humanoid, but its features were distorted, grotesque, its face twisted with a malevolent grin that seemed to stretch too wide. Its eyes burned with a dark fire, and its body shimmered as if composed of shadow itself. "By the valor," Thorin whispered, stepping back. "What is that?" "It is one of the ancient guardians," Gandalf replied, his hand instinctively moving toward his staff. "Creatures once bound by Morgoth's will, corrupted by his evil. They were made to serve him, but their purpose has long been forgotten." As they looked around, more of these creatures began to materialize from the darkness, each one more twisted than the last. They were no longer dwarves, no longer men, but aberrations, corruptions of life itself, kept hidden away in Erebor for centuries. "These are the true horrors that the dwarves awoke," Gandalf continued, his voice steady despite the rising tension. "This place is not just a tomb of treasure. It is a tomb of ancient evil. The relic they uncovered, the one Smaug was guarding, was far more than just gold. It was a key to Morgoth's power, locked away to keep it from corrupting the world once more." As the creatures began to move toward them, the group drew their weapons, preparing for the inevitable confrontation. But even as they did, they realized that this was not just a fight for survival. It was a battle to prevent the ancient evil from escaping, from spreading once more across Middle-earth. Gandalf's face hardened, his staff crackling with energy. "We must destroy the relic," he said. "Only then can we prevent this power from unleashing once again." Smaug's hoard was never just wealth, it was a prison, and now the key has been turned. As they engaged the Guardians, the battle was fierce. The creatures, once bound to Morgoth's will, were no mere beasts. They were powerful, relentless, and filled with a deep, primordial hunger. Their movements were swift, and their blows struck with the force of stone, sending tremors through the ground. The group fought back with all their might, but it was clear that they were outmatched. These creatures were more than mere shadows. They were remnants of Morgoth's ancient empire, and they were bound to Erebor by an ancient and terrible power. As the group pressed forward, the whispers grew louder, and the shadows began to close in. The mountain itself seemed to shift around them, pulling them deeper into the heart of the darkness. Each strike of their weapons against the Guardians seemed to make the air grow colder, more oppressive. They had to move fast. There was no time to waste. The relic was their only hope. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they reached the pedestal where the relic lay. It was a black stone, smooth and gleaming with an unnatural light. Gandalf's hand trembled as he reached out to touch it, the power radiating from it like a force of nature. He could feel the weight of Morgoth's influence, the centuries of corruption and evil that had been sealed away within this artifact. The moment Gandalf's fingers brushed against the stone, the chamber seemed to shake. The Guardians screamed in fury, their forms writhing in agony as the relic's power surged through them. The very air around them began to warp, twisting with dark energy. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, as if they were trying to warn them, or perhaps urging them to release the power. "We have to destroy it," Gandalf shouted, his voice strained against the rising chaos. "Quickly, before it's too late." But as the group prepared to act, the very walls of Erebor seemed to shift. The stone groaned under the weight of centuries, and the shadows tightened around them, trapping them in a web of ancient power. The Guardians surged forward, their forms now more monstrous, more violent, as if they had been unleashed. The tension in the air was palpable, the sense of dread overwhelming. Gandalf turned toward his companions, eyes filled with urgency. "We cannot retreat," he said. "This evil must be sealed away once again, or it will consume Middle-earth. Fight. We must destroy the relic." The Guardians charged. The group braced themselves, and for the first time, they truly realized that the darkness beneath Erebor was no mere legend. It was alive, and it was awakening.